Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you another fascinating guest today involved in creating a better tomorrow for millions of people out there. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Kyriacos Koupparis, who is the head of the Hunger Monitoring Unit at the United Nations World Food Program, where he's involved in leading a really dynamic team of software engineers, data scientists, food security analysts, ultimately utilizing real-time data, analytics, artificial intelligence, and other tools to track food security globally to help support the World Food Program's fight against hunger. In his previous role at the World Food Program, he was involved in the Innovation Accelerator there, leading a team that explored how emerging technologies, including AI, but also blockchain, robotics, ultimately can be used to catalyze impact in the context of humanitarian assistance and food security. Dr. Koupparis has devoted the last 15 years of his career working at the intersection of science, technology, innovation, and international development. He initially started off as a biomedical researcher, actually working on drug discovery for neglected tropical diseases, and then he got into the area of pioneering different programs to advance human and planetary prosperity across the globe. He has worked in over 20 countries around the world, including holding various roles at both the United States Department of State and USAID, as well as the United Nations. He holds both a master's degree and a Ph.D. in Biomedical Sciences from UCSF. He graduated also from the Management Technology program at the UC Berkeley Haas School of Business, and also did his undergrad in chemistry at Wayne State University. Really a lot of interesting topics to get into today. Dr. Kyriacos Koupparis, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thanks, Ira. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful having you. I would love to start off sort of at the beginning, but I mean, I took a look at your PhD and some of what you were doing in drug discovery for trypanosomiasis and African sleeping sickness, and looking at drug discovery for neglected tropical diseases. Obviously, you're going some really other interesting directions, but take us back to the beginning, if you would, and sort of how this really interesting journey that you started off in drug discovery all got going.
Sure. Well, the short of it is I'm a science geek. I was, still am. And so I've always had an affinity for the sciences, chemistry in particular, when I was in high school and undergrad. And as I was finishing my undergraduate degree, I was really keen on exploring how science can be used to address global issues. At the time, I was really passionate about HIV/AIDS, and I was doing research around multi-drug resistant HIV, and that was how I embarked on a career whereby I wanted to use my affinity for science and technology to address issues of global importance. When I did my PhD, I rotated in a few different labs at UCSF, and stumbled upon a lab that was studying neglected tropical diseases, which to me was completely fascinating, both from a scientific standpoint, how these parasites are able to infect the host and essentially go from humans to vectors and back again. But more importantly, I was really fascinated by the fact that these diseases impacted 1 billion people across the globe, but you never really heard about them. And of course, most pharmaceutical companies were not researching drugs for neglected tropical diseases, hence the name neglected. So I thought it would be a good use of my time and my skills to focus my PhD on African sleeping sickness, one of the several parasitic diseases that my lab was studying. Towards the end of my PhD, I was quite aware that I was not really keen on being a researcher at the bench. And what I wanted to do was um, look at these issues more from a strategic and a global point of view. So that's when I started to explore the idea of working in international development, international affairs. Feel free to stop me if I'm going into too much or too little detail, but
No. You're doing perfect, and it's interesting at this point because I enjoy once again sort of looking at our guest bio, and it's sort of at this part of your career, sort of you have the aha moment. I want to work on social issues that have this major impact, and then you head off between the State Department and USAID. You head off to more countries than I've visited in my lifetime in a couple of years. We've been touching on this very interesting theme on the show about both science and health diplomacy. Had folks on like Secretary Medina and recently Ambassador Nkengosong and talking about issues like the oceans, obviously the PEPFAR program. You were put into some really interesting projects. You were working on smart water technologies in the Middle East. You were looking at artificial intelligence and sort of blockchain technologies throughout Southeast Asia. Take a little time to sort of walk through that year. I mean, before we get to World Food Program, because you're on such an amazing journey here, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
Sure. So at the State Department, I was working in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, which kind of came about because before that I was actually an intern in the Science Advisor's Office for the Secretary of State. And through that role, I was able to understand a bit more what the State Department was doing, and this opportunity opened with the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, where I essentially was a program officer looking at different grants and agreements within the foreign assistance realm that the US government provided to countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. The topics were quite wide-ranging, from climate change to women's empowerment and clean energy. Following that, I was applied to the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. While I was at the State Department, I had met several current and former fellows. I think one of the I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't interviewed several of them. I saw, for example, Andrew Hebler was one of your interviewees.
Yep.
He was actually very instrumental in highlighting the fellowship, but also showing that the fellowship was a way to enter into a career whereby science and technology could be used for development and international affairs. And so through that fellowship is how I ended up at USAID as the Middle East Bureau's first science, technology, innovation, and partnerships advisor. At the time, the USAID administrator was Rasham, and he has a medical background. He came from the Gates Foundation, and he was really keen to infuse the international development with science, technology, and innovation. And so a lot of the offices and bureaus within USAID were trying to beef up their staff with the skill set. So the Middle East Bureau, likewise, was looking for someone that could cover science and technology issues more generally. But at the time when I joined, there was a big focus on water scarcity, which, as you might imagine, is a big issue, was and still is, and I suspect will be an even bigger issue in the future in the Middle East and North Africa. Mm-hmm. So my role was to effectively design an initiative called the Middle East Water Security Initiative to help support entrepreneurs, researchers, anyone that was looking at the topic of water from the lens of science and technology. So it's basic research all the way to applied. And this is where, for example, we partnered with a research team from MIT. They were piloting desalination technology that they were developing in Cambridge, and we were able to explore its use in the Gaza Strip. And that was a collaboration with MIT, UNICEF, and obviously USAID. And there were other such programs that were generated in order to support research and technology within the realm of water security, looking at irrigation and water use in agriculture, looking at how utilities could improve their performance and reduce what is known as non-revenue water, using technology that NASA had developed, sonar technology to map aquifers and so forth. And so I was at the Middle East Bureau for 2 years. And following that, there was an opportunity to do something similar, but with the Asia Bureau. So that's when I pivoted focus, both in terms of geography, but also in terms of sector. I was still assigned as a science and technology and innovation advisor, but I covered all sectors, health, education, environment, and I was focused on Asia. And through that role, I moved to Thailand. So I was based in the Regional Development Mission for Asia for 3 years, and there I worked on a variety of projects that had a science and technology lens. One project was looking at new innovations to grow palm oil sustainably, which is a big issue in terms of deforestation in Southeast Asia, in particular Indonesia and Malaysia. I also led the design of a program to support ASEAN, which is the multilateral organization formed by Southeast Asian nations, to look at the digital economy and how they might be able to support their citizens and their small and medium-sized enterprises to benefit from and participate in the digital economy. So things like cybersecurity, data privacy, digital literacy, but also looking at the science piece. I worked on a science and technology prize for women in partnership with Underwriter Laboratories. So this was our attempt to elevate women in science, especially in Southeast Asia, and to provide a platform for pioneering women to showcase the importance of having women in the scientific field. That was also around the time that blockchain was becoming known, or it had been around for years, but around 2017 to 18 is when it started to become mainstream, so to speak. And so there was a lot of questions around how frontier technology, blockchain being one of them, but also AI and others, that were, creating a lot of buzz. What was the relevance of these technologies within our sector, and how could we use these technologies to augment the work that we are doing as USAID? So I led several workshops in partnership with the UN to explore how frontier technology is influencing, disrupting, and can be used in international development. And through that work, I met folks at the World Food Program in their Innovation Accelerator. And as you pointed out, I joined WFP in 2019.
Excellent. And yeah, it's so here now you take on this new role, well, first with the Innovation Accelerator, and next in your current role for the Hungarian Monitoring Unit, and here I guess just for educating the audience who may be less familiar, I mean, here you have the world's largest humanitarian organization serving hundreds of millions of people, over 120 countries, with a major focus of, well, a lot of the Sustainable Development Goals, but core to this, Sustainable Goal 2, Zero Hunger by 2030. You start off in the Innovator, and it's interesting because I was going into the Innovator and looking at some of what you were involved there. Once again, I guess in my mind, I had more of sort of, many of these projects are sort of in rural areas where maybe, there's not access, or food doesn't grow as well, so forth. But one of your core projects I found fascinating was this moonshot initiative. It was called WFPX, looking at, of all things, megacities, and this trend that we might not think as much about, that we got a lot of people moving into the cities, putting amazing strain on the food systems. You led a moonshot that specifically focused on the city of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, again, looking at technologies, a broad range of technologies, everything from processing to alternative agricultural systems. Take us through that. Introduce us a little bit to WFP, if you would, but talk a little bit about, because I think we don't, once again, with organizations like this, don't normally associate the term moonshot, but what you're doing here is, very creative in thinking about how you solve some of these problems, especially in the megacities.
Yeah, let me start first with WFP. As you rightfully pointed out, we are the world's largest humanitarian organization, and we are the first responders in most, if not all, crises that you may hear in the news, whether that's conflict or climate. For recent examples, the earthquake that occurred in Syria, on the border of Syria and Turkey, right? We were the first ones there. Floods in Southern Africa, the floods in Pakistan last year, Ukraine, all these places, anywhere where there's a vulnerable population that needs life-saving assistance, we are there to respond. Yep. And we do this primarily through two means. We either provide physical food, so rice, wheat, sorghum, and so forth, or more and more increasingly, we provide cash assistance. Mm-hmm. So either through a debit card, or through mobile money, or through paper vouchers. And cash is definitely preferred because it supports local economies, and it also provides the people we serve with the dignity to choose whatever they deem is important for their families and themselves. It's also a lot easier to move cash than it is to move tons of food and supplies. And we're also the logistics arm of the humanitarian sector. So, for example, the World Food Program operates what is known as UNHAS, which is the United Nations Humanitarian Airlift Support or System. I forget what the acronym stands for exactly, but the point being is we operate 100 airplanes that we use to move personnel and supplies in hard-to-reach places. So again, think of, when Ebola hit West Africa, a lot of commercial airlines stopped flying into West Africa. So we were the ones to support the mobilization. We also have either own or charter 5,000 trucks that operate daily and transport goods across the world, as well as 10 ships that are moving tons of supplies with where they're needed. So whenever there is an emergency response, we coordinate the logistics, we coordinate the provision of food, and we also coordinate the provision of telecommunication assets. So as you might imagine, it's really important to restore communication, mm-hmm. both for first responders to be able to communicate with each other, but also for the impacted population to be able to contact service providers and also their families and relatives. So with that backdrop, the World Food Program established an innovation unit 7 years ago, or 8 years ago, I should say, in 2015, called the Innovation Accelerator. And in brief, the mandate of the Accelerator was to identify, source, and support innovations that can go to scale in order to support the mission of the World Food Program, which is effectively to end hunger by 2030. And I can go into more details how this operates, but if anyone is familiar with accelerators in the private sector, Y Combinator, plug and play, and so forth, very similar model. And so we support innovators internally. So it could our staff from across the world have access to resources, coaching, mentorship, and support to test their own ideas. And we also identify startups externally that we then bring into the fold and test those ideas out in the different countries in which we operate. my role when I joined was to lead a team called Frontier Innovations. And you can think of us as the R&D part of the accelerator. So we had longer time horizons, and we were looking explicitly at frontier technologies, things like artificial intelligence, blockchain, robotics, and other such technologies. But we also were looking at different approaches to innovation. And this is where the program that you referenced comes in. We had received some funding from the government of Luxembourg to explore frontier innovation, both on the technology side, but also from an approach side. And for those in the innovation space, I'm sure many are familiar with Google X.
Yep.
And so we were trying to emulate that approach with I laugh with like 1,000th of the budget and like 1,000th of the staff and resources. But the idea was there, right? To find a big problem and to see if we could use frontier technologies to solve this problem at scale. And we were also looking into the future. So that's why we picked the topic of urban food insecurity, because it is increasingly becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And we all know that by 2050, 80% of the world's population will be living in cities. So there is an acknowledgement that the type of work that we do will need to be happening increasingly in cities. But more importantly, as governments think of food security, traditionally, as you rightfully pointed out, it has been mostly focused on rural areas, and rightfully so. But there's an increasing prevalence of food insecurity in cities. So we picked the topic of urban food security. We picked Dar es Salaam because it's an archetype of a city that's in a lower middle income country, and that is rapidly on the rise. So I forget the statistics, but its population is going to double within the next decade. And very shortly after that, it's going to be one of the mega cities of the world. So rapid urbanization, rapid growth, huge informal areas, informal settlements, informal economies. But also a lot of innovation happening within Tanzania, within Dar es Salaam. So it was a good place to bring those two together. And so we designed this program, and we recruited advisors, even from Google X, to help us think through how to design an innovation program that is looking at, 10 years into the future, is looking at technologies, not in terms of what they can do today, but also, how will they develop in the future? And then looking at urban food insecurity, taking a systems approach. So it wasn't just looking at food waste or clean energy for food or food transport from, production to consumption. We were looking at the entire web of food systems in Dar es Salaam. And so 10 local innovators from the city itself that had a diversity of backgrounds. So we had a behavioral scientist, we had a robotics engineer, we had a nutritionist. You get the point. So we were trying to cover all dimensions and all aspects of both the skill set required to address a multidisciplinary issue such as food insecurity. And over the span of, I think it was 3 months, we went through sort of a deep dive on the food system in Dar. We mapped out all the major players and value chains and problems facing the food system in Dar. We projected that out into 10 years and said, okay, well, this is the problem today, but what we're really solving for is the problem as it will manifest in 10 years. And then we went through a series of ideation exercises looking at how can we bring in frontier technology to address some of these big issues. We recruited a panel of experts, including local judges from Dar es Salaam. We had judges from WFP, we had technologists, we had an individual who did his PhD on the food system in Dar, so he knew it quite well. And they helped us refine and narrow down those ideas to, I think, 5 or 6, and those 6 were prototyped in the city. So we built prototypes. We tested them out with citizens in Dar. We got feedback on their viability, their feasibility, their desirability. And we went through several iterations of prototyping until we then presented the results of the prototyping to a group of potential funders and experts. The last I recall was, I think, the Embassy of Sweden or Switzerland, I forget which of the two, was keen to see one of the ideas move forward, so they provided some support for that. Unfortunately, we did not receive any additional funding to continue development of the prototypes, and so the program ended after the demo day in front of the investors.
You know, as you were talking about that basket of emerging technologies that you were evaluating, and you mentioned things like AI, there's things listed like quantum and ag tech and so forth. Per your new role in the hunger monitoring unit, many of those technologies, the mobile tech, the AI, of course, data analytics, is really providing some interesting platforms that you're integrating together in this new role. Again, if you could sort of take us into the hunger monitoring unit, and then one of the things that stood out to me was this this program called the Hunger Map that you've developed, and I think you've deployed it in something like 90 different countries now, where basically you're using those tools to look at everything. So population density, vegetation index, different macroeconomic indications in a certain region. Because I think this is again, because a lot of this comes back to this theme of AI for good. We hear so much about scary things about AI nowadays, but here's something where you've taken the tool, you've taken great data source, and you created this amazing tool called the Hunger Map. Talk a little bit about that one.
Yes. So in short, the hunger monitoring unit is trying to answer the following question: who is food insecure? Where do they live? How food insecure are they? And how will that situation change in the short term? And so in order to do that, we have established remote data collection processes in 37 countries. Primarily, we collect data directly from individuals through mobile-based surveys. We aggregate this data collection process on a daily basis. It gets analyzed and displayed on what you mentioned, the Hunger Map platform. Mm-hmm. So for those listening, you can access it. It's public. It's hungermap.wfp.org. And the data is made available to a global audience. You can access the data through an API, and you can analyze it as you see fit. On that platform, we also aggregate data on the key drivers of food insecurity, namely conflict, climate, and economic data. So if you go on Hunger Map, you'll see that there is an alert system that signals when certain thresholds are exceeded when it comes to climate, conflict, or economic shocks. Mm-hmm. And we're using this rich data set of both the primary data that we collect in 37 countries, as well as the secondary data from the drivers that I just mentioned. We've developed an AI model that can estimate the level of food insecurity in an additional 52 countries where we do not collect real-time data. And so combined, the AI model and the real-time data collection, we have coverage in 90 countries in which the World Food Program operates. The most recent work on the predictive side is to use the real-time monitoring data that we collect in those 37 countries to also develop a forecasting AI model. So now we have a model that can forecast these food security indicators up to 90 days into the future. And we piloted this model in 4 countries: Yemen, Cameroon, Mali, and Nigeria, with quite promising results.
Say a few words also along those lines about again, related to you had this project. You were talking about it recently at the International Telecommunications Union. It was on AI powered vehicles as part of the humanitarian deployment. Say a couple words about that, because I think it's another interesting way that you're employing sort of the AI in this grand mission.
Yeah, that was a project that I spearheaded when I was still with the Innovation Accelerator.
Okay.
It was a collaboration that we pursued with the German Space Agency.
Neat.
The problem that we're trying to solve in this project was effectively, in certain circumstances, we have areas that are hard to reach, whether because of conflict or natural hazards, floods, for example. And in these areas, what we currently do is we have drivers that are using an amphibious vehicle called the SHERP, and they navigate through tricky terrains in order to reach populations that have been isolated and that need food assistance. What we're trying to do with the German Space Agency is to take the technology that they've developed for their Mars rover,
Neat.
take this amphibious vehicle that we are currently using in our operations, and bring the two together in order to generate a remote operated version of the amphibious vehicle that I just mentioned. And the hopeful outcome is that we can operate the vehicle and deliver food supplies without putting a driver at risk of harm, whether because of natural hazards or landmines, or because there might be an ongoing conflict happening. And so we demoed the first prototype of a remote operated SHERP vehicle 6 months ago on the premises of the German Space Agency right outside of Munich. And we will continue to refine the prototype and hopefully be able to test it in the field sometime next year.
Excellent. Really cool. You wrote this fascinating article recently. It was an op-ed in December of 2022 in the Yale Journal of International Affairs, and it was entitled "Solutions Underpinned by Science, Technology, and Innovation That Can Transform Food Systems." And in this article, you talk about how over the decades, we've developed this food system that, while it creates a lot of calories, it underdelivers in terms of nutrition, and then does a lot of stuff to harm various ecosystems. And you pose a vision for a sort of a 2050 world where not only can we enhance calories and nutrition simultaneously, but where livelihoods are impacted, where we can contribute to decarbonization through the ag tech process. Say a couple of words about this article, if you would, because I found it fascinating, again, the way you're integrating a vision for what possibly could be with these emerging technologies.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm glad someone read the article.
It's a good article.
And so yeah, food systems is a topic that I'm really passionate about, both because I work at the World Food Program, but also because I think it's such a fundamental issue that if we address can solve multiple problems at the same time. Yep. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. Our food systems are responsible for up to a third of greenhouse gas emissions, right? But they're also the most vulnerable to climate change. If you look at health indices, both in terms of hunger, but also overweight and obesity, we're seeing alarming rates of all forms of malnutrition. If you look at economic growth, many low-income countries rely on agriculture for their economic growth. And I think the latest estimate is that 500 million smallholder farmers are engaged in agriculture, which translates to approximately 2.5 billion people rely on agriculture to earn a living and to grow food for themselves and their families. So if we can get this right, if we can develop and evolve our global food system to one that is equitable, nourishing, and sustainable, then it has an amplifying effect across a whole variety of problems.
Yep.
And so the article that I wrote was effectively taking a look at, well, how did we get to this point today, right? So we've made enormous strides in the food space, and a lot of those strides were driven by technological innovation. From the plow all the way to now driverless tractors that we have in the US. And so looking towards the future, we know the challenges in front of us are enormous. And so we need to find ways to change the system in order to minimize these negative impacts that I mentioned. And I do want to highlight here that innovation and technology is not just about the gadgets and the products, right? I mean, that's important, but I also think we need innovations in our institutions and in the way that we value, the ecosystem services, for example, that farmers are delivering, right? Clean water, clean air, they don't get paid for that. Carbon sequestration, they don't get paid for that.
Right.
The way that consumers can think about food and the price that we pay, especially in developed economies. So there's a lot of institutional innovation that has to happen alongside technological innovation in order to realize the vision that I articulate in that article.
And I particularly like the one section on nutritious food for all. And then at the end of that section, you mentioned this really interesting, the theme of food as medicine. And then you get into areas like personalized nutrition and genetics and sort of the excitement of the microbiome nowadays. I was just interested, sort of, obviously, I spent my early career in the pharmaceutical industry, and here we have an industry that it's the last 100 years, it's been heavily based on interesting bioactive substances derived from the plant kingdom. And here, thinking back to the non, tropical infectious diseases like malaria, you have quinine back in the day, which, started a lot of that off. What gets you excited in terms of sort of the thinking about your drug discovery history and some of the things you're doing back then, because I know there's interesting sort of anti-protozoals and so forth that are being studied from the natural world. But what else gets you excited in terms of sort of where some of this could go in terms of the real high value potential of these agri products?
I think for me, what gets me excited is that there's finally the realization that food can be such a driver for positive change. And I think that was also, I also mentioned this in the article during last year's COP27. There were multiple sessions and pavilions. There was a whole day dedicated on food for the first time, right? And we're seeing this in the healthcare industry as well, in the US in particular, but also the White House had a convention in, I forget when exactly, but it was in September, October. They were looking at, for the first time in 50 years, they were looking at how food can be used to address health disparities in the US.
Yeah.
And so I think, to me, I'm excited that the relevant stakeholders are finally realizing the connection between food and health, food and environment, food and equity, right?
Yep.
From an innovation or technology lens, there's a whole slew of things that are coming to bear. I think synthetic biology really will transform everything, right? And we're seeing it. What I hope happens is that we've learned from the past and that this powerful suite of technologies under this umbrella term of synthetic biology is equitably distributed, right? And that's even like from personalized medicine, that's still a very niche and only available to sort of wealthier individuals, right? But also if we look at generating climate-ready crops, again, if we look at sort of the Green Revolution and how that played out, a lot of the criticisms there are, not necessarily because of the technology, but how we as a society decided the business model would look like, right? And so you had, and so I don't need to go into that in further detail. So for me, I think synthetic biology offers enormous potential. I think, as you said earlier, artificial intelligence definitely offers enormous potential, but both of those are extremely powerful technologies.
Right.
And a lot of the debate around AI now, a lot of the debate around synthetic biology is not new in the sense that the dual use dilemma has been around since,
Sure.
man invented fire, right?
Right.
So you can use fire to cook a nice meal, or you can use fire to burn your neighbor's house down, right?
Right.
So it's a matter of how we as a society educate, each other, our children, how we develop institutions and norms and policies that safeguard against the harms and ensure that the benefits of these technologies are equitably distributed. And we've even seen in the sort of the last decade or two, the internet era, again, a lot of the wealth creation, a lot of those benefits have accrued to the top, right? And yes, the penetration of mobile has been an enormous transformation across the globe, but the wealth creation has not been equally distributed. So for me, we're heading into a super fascinating era. I feel that there are enormous breakthroughs being made on a daily basis. And so we have all the tools and resources to address a lot of the problems that we encounter. I think what we need are the institutions and the policies to ensure that we're going in the right direction. And I know that's obviously oversimplifying things, but that is fundamentally the challenge here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Kyriacos, I mentioned that you were, last a couple of months ago, you were the International Telecommunications Union talking about AI for good. I watched it a Binance fireside chat talking about blockchain and the humanitarian aid space. What else is coming up for you in 2023 in terms of public facing initiatives, other conferences, talks, places that we could listen to you, potentially meet you? Anything else happening in the next couple of months that you want to highlight? Please take the floor.
Sure, thanks, Sarah. I recently just gave a lightning talk at the Global Digital Development Forum, so that should be online. That happened 2 days
Right,
ago,
right, right.
and
Mm-hmm.
that's organized by USAID and partners, and it showcases how technology and innovation can be used for development. Upcoming, I have the AI for Good Summit in Geneva in July,
Yep.
where I'll be talking about the work that I'm doing. And that's it for now. I should mention I started my role 3 months ago, so I'm still also in the getting to learn everything mode. But I do think it's important to share the work that we do. One, because I think, especially now with the discourse around AI, we risk
Yeah.
a backlash, right, of being over regulating. And I definitely think everything needs to be considered and on the table. But I also think we need examples of how AI can be used for benefit and to have a more informed discourse around what it can and cannot do, right? I also think the World Food Program is doing extraordinary work from a humanitarian standpoint. But I think what is less known is the level of ingenuity and innovation that is within the World Food Program. Because again, most people hear UN and they're like, oh, this stodgy institution from, the 1950s. But I think, at least I speak for WFP because I have direct experience there. There's enormous innovation happening there. And so I want the world to know that. I want the world to support that. I'm always looking for partners. A lot of the work that you've mentioned, whether it's the robotic amphibious vehicle that was with the German Space Agency, I worked on an AI product to automate damage assessment in satellite images that was done with
Yep.
Google Research. Hunger
Mm-hmm.
Map was developed with Alibaba. We need to work together, and that's sort of my parting words is that these challenges are enormous, and it will require the private sector, it will require governments, it will require big INGOs like the UN and WFP, it will require individuals. We all have to do our part if we're going to get through this.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I, again, that's one of the main reasons I invited you on the show, because I've talked, as you know, to some of your other colleagues at various UN organizations, and yeah, I mean the degree, whether it's the FAO, UNICRI, what you're doing, of course, the degree that you're employing innovation and technology to solve these issues is just it's fascinating, and I take my hat off to you. I just it's just so impressive, and really wishing you and your team, as you continue in this new role, that they're really the best for all of it, as you help solve this major critical issue and sustainable goal too, of course. Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. Kyriacos Koupparis, head of the Hunger Monitoring Unit, United Nations World Food Program, doing really amazing things to support their mission to end hunger around the world. Kyriacos, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us a little while on these issues. Obviously, thank you for everything you've been doing and continue to do. And as we like to say on this show here, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for millions of people out there via what you do. Really such an impressive story.
Thanks, Ira. My sincere pleasure.